Whether your team is your family, your business, or your employees, staying connected is crucial. You can depend on the Cross Insurance family
Very good.
to provide the best insurance solutions for you. We've got your team protected. Visit crossagency.com today.
Hi, I'm Lauren King, and it's my pleasure to be here with following the screening of 8 Billion Angels. And I'm very excited to host this conversation with the film's producer, Terry Spar. I just want to make note that the film, hi Terry, great to have you here.
Thank you.
The film 8 Billion Angels with Terry Spar as producer. It's going to be available until this Friday on Showcase Now. If you haven't seen it, or if you want to tell people to check it out, Showcase Now until Friday. So Terry, great to have you here. Thank you so much for doing this conversation.
My pleasure. Thrilled to be on board with y'all.
Now, where do you live, Terry? Where are you?
I am outside the Philadelphia region near Villanova University, which many of your readers probably are familiar with.
Yes, I think so. Yeah. So there's so much information in 8 Billion Angels. My first question is just going to be, how did you decide you wanted the film structured to include so much? And well, let me ask you that first. I mean, I know you probably knew enough in your work as an environmentalist that you didn't want to overwhelm it and give too much information, but yet there's an awful lot that we learn.
Well, I appreciate that, and it's a very difficult thing as a filmmaker to take literally 300 hours of film and distill it down to something that is digestible in 90 minutes, and in this case 79 minutes. So it is a challenge to find the best vignettes and stories, and I think for us it was trying to crystallize an issue that is bigger than just one symptom, which most people think of as climate change, which is very real and a real problem, but it's just one symptom, as you saw in the film, of multiple symptoms. And what is that common thread? And that was sort of what was the structure of the film, was to help see that it's across our lands, in our waters, in our airs, and it's a much greater problem than just climate change, and it's a human impact crisis. And then it flowed into, and we thought it was important to have solutions, which a lot of these, whether it's climate films or environmental films, they leave you hanging and sort of depressed when you leave the theater. So we didn't want to do that. So we had a hopeful kind of ending. I hope you found it hopeful and inspiring, and also with some real solutions.
Mm-hmm. As I was watching it, I was very absorbed by the information you were giving, as you said, about the various, the water, the land. And then when we got to the issue of population, it felt like, I wondered at what point you decided as the filmmaker, and just as someone very familiar with all these issues, that was going to be the sort of where the film began to really have a solution. We know all these things exist, but it seemed that you did home in on the fact that this is really what could be the defining piece of the puzzle here.
It's a very difficult subject to discuss. It's a minefield, as you know, Lauren. Politically, from a reproductive rights perspective, culturally, economically. So it's a difficult subject to tease out and deliver in a way that is what I hope it came across as honest and forthright, as far as it being a problem that we need to address. And there are two things that we can address. One is our numbers of people who are consuming, and the other is the consumption. And we can talk about this later, but reducing our consumption hasn't happened in the 57 years that we've been tracking it on a global level, and it's only going up year in, year out. And it's a very difficult thing to move that variable.
Mm-hmm. You make it very clear in the film. When I say you, as the filmmaker, but the experts that you've gathered who so eloquently talk about these issues, but they make it very clear it's not about population, it's about consumption. I was very struck by that, because that's not saying, have small families, don't do this, don't do that. It's really, this can't be sustained, was the message I got, that there's too much consumption, and if the people continue to use the resources at the rate they are, it's just not going to be sustainable. So do you find that when you say it's a controversial topic, people aren't as weirded out by it if you use the word consumption as opposed to population control? Maybe control is the buzzword there.
I think that's a negative term that people do use, and I would look at it and as the solutions discuss, it's about embracing women's rights and reproductive health, which are vitally important in their own right, as a matter of public health and social justice, but they also have this beautiful outcome, from success, in this arena, as far as in the reduction of total fertility and a slowing of population growth, which, inevitably helps, ensure a sustainable future for everyone.
Yeah. I was very struck by that section about the city Kerala in India, where the correlation between letting women, especially young, poor women, be informed and know that they have some agency about the size of their reproductive rights was so key to trying to solve some of this. That was an amazing sequence.
It is. It was fascinating to visit and spend time with that politician who is the leader of the one party, basically there, the one party, the Congress party in India, and very wise individual. And he comes and he hails from that state, Kerala. And it just was fascinating to see how 200 years of educating both girls and boys and enabling and empowering women to make their own decisions and to give them good health care and reproductive autonomy, and to, have an education since birth. It's amazing how they improve their health and living conditions for themselves and their families. And they tend to have, as you saw, fewer children and space them more. And they're expecting to have a reduction in their population this year in that state.
It was amazing. It's a very eye-opening sequence. And now that's India, and they have obviously so many issues there with the environment and with their social and reproductive. Here in the United States, I mean, what you talk about, to hear that and think it makes so much sense logically for the environment, but this comes at a time when there's an outright assault on women's reproductive rights in this country. I mean, those are the kind of things that must make environmentalists just so frustrated. I mean, here you're trying to come up with solutions and you're constantly battling a system that it must just feel like a fire, that fires are burning everywhere.
Yes, but I feel there's hope, and so I administrations come and go, and pendulums do swing, and I do feel there is a swing back to a more thoughtful look at our overall unsustainable population growth and how it is impacting the environment, and also it's so tied intimately to those things we're talking about as far as reproductive rights and basically enabling and empowering women. They're together, and it's a really kind of a neat solution that has huge value both for social justice and for environmental justice.
Yeah, a few times throughout the film, Terry, the phrase "political will" was said, and I was struck by that, because I think for most of us, right? I mean, that feels like in this climate we're in right now, is there enough political will? Again, it just sometimes feels. And I'm sure for you or many people, it feels overwhelming, because how are we going to get so many of these changes enacted when there doesn't seem to be political will for some of the most basic issues?
And I think that's true, Lauren. It's interesting. I think that the action and it starts at home. It's interesting. I encourage my own children to consider having a smaller family on their own until we get our climate, water, food, pollution, energy, and extinction emergencies under control. And you take those sort of granular approaches, which you can do at your home, and the viewers can do at their home today, and you can extend that, because I think social norms can be changed quite rapidly, when they're intentional individuals and intentional groups working on those initiatives. And we've seen it happen in many countries. And if you have enough people having a conversation, Lauren, loudly and often enough, you then begin to change those social norms. So it's definitely achievable.
Mhm. So let me talk a little bit with you about the film itself. Why did you decide, with all your background and obvious experience with all of this, why did you decide a film was the vehicle as opposed to a book or other ways that you could have gotten this message out there?
It would have been much cheaper to write a book. But I think many of the viewers can relate to this, that who are on the call tonight, is there's sometimes you have a deep feeling inside of you that can percolate there for many years. And I saw this problem sort of evolve in my eyes over the past 15 to 20 years. And I just said, how can I affect the most people broadly? And a book, and there's some good books on the subject, but I didn't feel that was the best way to communicate. And so I decided to choose the medium of film. And I think we did a pretty good job. We've gotten some wonderful awards and some amazing viewership since we released the film in April.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And the people that you have commenting in the film are certainly quite impressive. How did you go about finding them and include? And you probably found more interesting people than you were able to include, but how did you come to want to include the ones that we see in 8 Billion Angels?
As we were discussing offline before the start here, it was important to get a diverse group of thought leaders and from different fields. And I think we accomplished that with a bioethicist, marine biologists, environmental warriors, to business people, to conservation biologists. And I think that where they came from, I guess it takes a lot of research and then a lot of calling and a lot of communicating. And the research was reading good books and seeing different stories. Like I was reading about the Ogallala Aquifer a number of years ago in National Geographic, and some of those farmers that we interviewed and the people in that scene and those scenes were from that story. And I followed up with them saying, I read this great story and we want to do a film about what's happening in the Midwest to our unsustainable agricultural practices. So a lot of research and a lot of behind the scenes, phone calling and communication.
Wow. Yeah. How long a process was that, Terry, before actually laying all that groundwork?
The reading and research took a number of years, but the from start to finish, I'd say about 6 months before you start actually shooting the scenes and doing all that. So it was about a 6-month window there, lining it all up. But it took a little bit longer for India because it's harder to get into India and to get the right people involved and to get the right permits. But we were able to get that done. We wrapped up all the filming in about 1.5 years, which was great.
Yeah. And you used the word story, and I earlier you had told me that it was very important for you to make this be about stories rather than issues. It's not newsy. It's very informative, but it isn't newsy. It feels very human.
Well, I appreciate that. There are a lot of narratives out there, and I don't think I'm the best looking person or the most articulate. So it probably was good not to have me narrate the film. So we felt that stories and having it from the view and from their viewpoint and not being part of the questioning or the story was important. So we really didn't want to break that barrier, which is what they called in the terms of when you do a documentary. And I think that the stories came out pretty poignantly, which was good.
Yeah. So tell me, I was very struck by the sequences in India. All of the stories are quite compelling, but to take that ride on that river was quite a moment. I'd just like to get a little of your reaction to that. Was that something you were struck by as well?
It's interesting. I was having such a hard time as my director was in getting the proper permits to get into India. There's a bunch of visas that part of the other film team was able to get in there. We were so delayed that we were rushing around. And by the time I got over to India, they had already filmed the river scenes. So I didn't get to experience the river firsthand on the river. But, it's unfortunate that the country, or at least Delhi, is just overrun with pollution, and it's in the air and it's in the waterways, as you saw. And it's a real challenge. And as the politician said, it's a very intractable one because it's all these things come from so many people, consuming so many resources and generating so much waste in different ways that it's very difficult. It's like whack-a-mole trying to fix it. It's a huge challenge.
Yeah. So now you hired the crew. I just want to know a little bit about the cinematography is quite compelling. From that river ride to the farmlands to many of the locations when I looked it up, I was surprised to see that there's only one credited cinematographer. So I wanted you to tell me a little bit about how that all came about, how that was actually done.
I have a friend of mine who's in the film world, and I said I want to find some young people to help me film this documentary because it's they're the ones who are going to be left with what we leave them, and I felt that was important for their voice to be in that film. So we actually brought on a team through the producer, one of my co-producers. A lot of her relationships that she had for basically millennials, young men and women who made up the core team there of the cinematographer who was excellent, and the director and the sound designer. So a really great young team that it was a great choice. They did a fantastic job.
Well, you mentioned young people, and it strikes me one of the thoughts I had watching it was people. It seems like a lot of people were motivated by having children. I want to leave something for my children, a better world than I found it. And at the same time, that could also be a source of despair. These poor kids, what are we leaving them? So there's an interesting push-pull there. And yet it seems that is a motivator for a lot of people to take action.
The bioethicist is fantastic. He's from Johns Hopkins, and he really spoke to the moral dilemma of, do I impose another child on this world, because especially a child from a developed world economy is going to consume and produce so much more wastes because we just have a higher affluence of living, do I want to impose this world and future world on a child? And it's saying, knowing what I know about the path that we're on and what we're doing to the environment, and to our natural resource base is, do we want to bring in more children to a world that may not be as good as we found it when we were born?
Yeah,
it is a moral dilemma.
Yeah. Yes. But yet it does give you hope when you say you worked with these young people on the film, to see so many young people embracing environmental activism. I'm sure that's a source of hope when you say you want this to be hopeful.
It is, because again, I think social norms can be changed, and they can be, changed pretty rapidly. So I think that the more people who are talking loudly and more often about this subject that the film addresses, I think the faster we will get to a more sustainable and just world for everybody, including those young people.
Well, I'm happy to see there's a few questions here from our audience, so I'm going to read it and you can answer it. The first question: how did you come up with the name for the documentary?
That's a fantastic question. Lauren, the inspiration for the title of the film is really twofold. I believe that we as humans have an enormous capacity for care, compassion, decency, and love. What I would term the better angels of our nature. Yet, as you all pretty much know, as we quickly approach 8 billion angels, our collective numbers and activity, no matter how benign or caring and decent we are, they're having massive and largely unintentional, catastrophic consequences for us and every living creature. And we must find the courage and the strength to address this truth. So that was sort of where the film's name came from.
Great. Okay, that's a great one. Okay, from Irene. I'm wondering about the very significant distinction that needs to be made between countries that are already at population replacement level or below, like the US and Japan, and those with runaway population growth, like India. Shouldn't those of us at replacement level focus on reducing consumption, which then parentheses, which by the way, younger generations are increasingly willing to do?
Irene, that's a great question because yes, there are many of the developed world is starting to see below fertility rates, replacement rate, and that's a good thing, and we should encourage that. A lot of economists and articles you'll see will say, oh my gosh, that the sky is falling, but it's a good thing. It's a good thing from a balance with nature and for allowing us to have those resources that we'll need for future generations. So we shouldn't be afraid of it, but the challenge is with reducing consumption. It's a good thing you brought that up. Is that it's difficult. There's significant headwinds, and the biggest is that a sustainable lifestyle for 8 billion people is, and you can go to our nonprofit website and research this a little bit more. It's earthovershoot.org, and a sustainable level of living is not very. It's not very attractive. It's a very ascetic life. It's living in essentially a one-room apartment with no central air, no central heat, no central hot water. It's literally having very little electricity, a very small kitchen with maybe a couple pieces of a tableware and maybe a few sets of clothes and some shoes, and it's not ever having driving in a car. It's never flying in an airplane. It's certainly not eating anything beyond what a local plant-based diet is. And that's essentially a sustainable threshold for all of us. The problem is that 3.5 billion of us, Lauren and Irene, are living above that, including all of us on the call today. And how do we get to there? It's a really different, and they talked about it in the film a little bit. The conservation biologist mentioned that too, because then you have the other 4 billion people who are living below that level. Yeah. And they should have every right. We should give them the room from a social justice perspective to grow, which means more consumption. So it's going to be very difficult to reduce our consumption because no one wants to do that, and it's a challenge. And so I think we have to acknowledge that we have to try and do it as best we can, but it's very hard, and we have to also address the issue of the our unsustainable population levels.
Yes, these are not easy things, and I commend the film for not pretending it is. These are really thorny. I mean, when you put it that way, yeah, that's a tough sell. That's a tough sell, to put it mildly, isn't it? And yet, yeah.
So, and I think just on the consumptions, and this is a very fascinating thing that a lot of bright people don't get, Lauren. But if I give up driving my car, that's really good for the environment. I'm no longer using all the metals and minerals that went into the production of the car. I'm no longer, using the oil and the gasoline that runs it and operates it. So it's a huge environmental impact. It's a good one to give up. But we also have to understand it's not isolated. There's another consequence to giving up driving, and for the average American, it costs them about $6,000 a year to drive a car. So they no longer have that expense, but they still get that money. They have that $6,000. And the question is, what do they do with it? And most people end up shifting it to other forms of consumption. They don't even think about it, but they leave the heat on a little bit higher in the wintertime, or the AC down a little lower in the summer, or they, take a trip to Europe, or that money gets shifted to some other, consumption or production. So that's why it's so difficult to change our overall consumption, because we can be good in certain areas, but there's a benefit, a financial benefit that comes from that we end up shifting it to other things we don't even know about.
But wouldn't it also be true that that person, to get to work or to get places, would have to find alternative modes of transportation? And I was struck by that scene in India. Oh, wonderful! People are taking the buses and they're pooling their ride, but the amount of pollution that must be coming from those sources is also daunting. So, like you said, it's so multi-pronged. Will we have a more efficient way for public transportation, for example, that doesn't burn fossil fuels? a lot that needs to be fixed for anything to get fixed. Another question, this is from an anonymous person, but this person would like to know, how do you feel about claims that the film is putting the onus of this problem mainly on women?
That's a good question. I hope that didn't convey that way. I guess we look at those solutions of enabling and empowering women as something that all society, men and women, and society and culture as a whole needs to embrace. The politicians down in Washington, especially the men down there, should be, in my opinion, allowing women to and trust women to make those decisions that are right for a woman and her own reproductive autonomy. The cultures, and this is addressed in the film, the cultures of patriarchy are a real problem in many places of the world. And and you heard the healthcare woman from India who spoke about that and saying we have to address those underlying issues of patriarchy, and we have to be able to. Men should not be engaged in those decisions that are empowering women. We should, beyond making sure that the playing field is there for them as equally as it for men.
Yeah, I was very struck by that section on India, that it does tend to be the very young. I mean, some of these girls who are uneducated. The education component is huge to that, isn't it? Yeah.
A massive, yes.
Yeah. I would like to know, Terry, what's next for you? I know you're busy promoting this film, and good for you. We want people to see it, but do you already have another idea of what's next?
I don't, because this is a enormous issue that we don't have another population film coming out, but it's an issue that is important that we need to elevate to from behind closed doors to in front of everybody, including politicians. So we established, Lauren, about 2 years ago, a nonprofit, as I mentioned, earthovershoot.org, that helps to further educate and advocate those issues that are addressed in the film, both in giving women those reproductive autonomy and empowering them, but also educating people as to what is overshoot and how do we actually achieve long-term sustainability. And so that's where we're focusing our efforts over the next few years.
Right. Yeah. And I'm sure you're encouraged by response to 8 Billion Angels, as we've had today a great response to the film. And has that been the case as you take it around to various festivals and screenings?
Yeah, we've been in some fabulous festivals, about 7 or 8 of them. They're on the website. But we were going to launch the film, Lauren, a year ago, right when COVID struck. It was April of 2020. So we had to pull back and sort of see the landscape. And as it evolved, we went to a hybrid model, which is essentially screening the film online through theaters. And so we wanted to support those theaters. So we had about 30 to 50 theaters nationwide that screened the film, and we did a world release that was virtual as well back in April of this year, 2021, around Earth Day week, which was great. Since then, we're doing a significant number of community screenings to universities, religious institutions, corporations, just interested parties and environmental groups, all kinds of walks of life. It's been fantastic. So that's keeping us extremely busy. And like the Boston Globe here, and other media groups that are doing the same thing. And it's been a very, very busy 4 months since we released it worldwide.
Well, I'm sure it's very heartening to you to get the film out to all the groups you mentioned, because I was going to ask about an educational component, but if you're doing that, you're showing it in universities and schools.
And that we've created actually a classroom cut, which is 54 minutes for classrooms, and also have a whole bunch of educational material online at the website, both the Earth Overshoot's website and 8 Billion Angels, to further classroom discussion, and also see scientific studies that back up what we're what the film is asserting.
Yes. Well, for those who haven't seen it or want to tell their friends, 8 Billion Angels is on Showcase now, streaming until Friday. So let's hope more people check it out. Terry Spar, the producer, it's been such a pleasure to have you here. And thank you for the fine work you've done on this and what you're continuing to do.
Lauren, thank you, and thank you all the Boston Globe patrons, and appreciate your interest in the subject. If you had questions that didn't get responded to, feel free to reach out through those websites. We answer every question as much as we can to be informative and helpful, and raising awareness to this real issue.
Yeah, such an important issue. Thank you so much, Terry. And thanks all of you for tuning in and listening to our conversation and watching the film. This was a lot of it was just really informative, and I thank you very much.
Thank you, Lauren. Thank you, everybody, and have a wonderful rest of your summer.